The third paper will be presented by Professor Jae-in Kim, Kyunghee University. Professor Kim's paper will be discussed by Deputy Director Hwai-Sing Yen, Economic Law Research Center, Chung-Hwa Institution for Economic Research.
Hello, I'm Jae-in Kim at Center for Cross-Cultural Studies, Kyunghee University. My major is Western philosophy, especially modern European philosophy like Nietzsche and Deleuze. Many thanks to Professor Kwang-Kyu Nam, Director of Center for Taiwan Studies ARI, for your kind invitation to this precious conference. Today, I'll talk about a set of new norms in post-COVID-19 era and how to form it. I would like to call it commonism because I think it is the most important for the humanity to agree what to share as common and how. Before going to the main talk, I briefly introduce myself. I translated 2 book series of Deleuze and Guattari's called Capitalism and Schizophrenia into Korean. One is Anti-Oedipus, the other is A Thousand Platos. And I wrote an introduction to philosophy of Deleuze and a short history of Western philosophy, and a book on artificial intelligence, and recently published a book on the new normal. Some of changes are temporary, but others are irreversible. World is not to be as it was, which I claimed in my book titled The Philosophy of the New Normal. What is the new normal? Extraordinary phenomena have become commonplace nowadays, and abnormalities are now accepted as normals. So it is called the new normal. A new normal pushes us to change. But many people ask if there is really the new normal. I would like to pay attention to the recent affairs in Korea. There has been a rapid increase in number of the new confirmed since late summer. Korean government, medical teams, and citizens began to follow new action guide established this spring season. For example, social distancing, remote learning, online meeting and lecture, and homeworking, etc. Despair and sigh of this fucking situation will be continued at least this autumn. I find that people unconsciously accept the new normal and obey the new norms. But I don't just refer to COVID-19 as the new normal condition. I also refer to the triple crisis of humans in 2020, that is, the simultaneous occurrence of climate crisis, artificial intelligence, and infectious disease pandemic. First, there has been an acceleration of frequency of fatal pandemic like SARS, MERS, and COVID-19, etc. Second, climate crisis. For example, heavy rain, powerful typhoon, severe heat, bitter cold, huge wildfire, heavy snow, etc. Third, there are also misuse and abuse of artificial intelligence like surveillance, control, discrimination, etc. I suggest that the background or cause of the new normal is the globalization of capitalism or completion of world capitalism. There is no place left on earth out of human hands based on the desire to increase profits, not from simple curiosity. During the process, Humans have contracted with the coronavirus, and the virus has swept through the world following human logistics and information networks created by capitalism. The production for production's sake, based on the self-proliferation tendency of capital, accelerated the consumption of resources and carbon emissions exponentially. That was the direct cause of climate crisis. Global ICT companies accumulated massive wealth through their ICT businesses based on AI. However, they do not care about the tasks of reducing the structural gap between the rich and poor across the globe. In other words, utilizing AI from the perspective of capitalism ensures the emergence of another disaster to humans. How can we overcome triple crisis? We must invent new planetary governance and new list of values by converting crisis into chance. The humanity has already overcome the crisis of extinction in the early stage of evolution. Anthropologists and paleontologists estimated that the human population had declined by 1,200 during the period of extreme cold. Considering that only a small number of people survived, cooperation between them would be necessary. Nietzsche once predicted this goal of humans briefly as follows. I quote, "1,000 goals have there been so far, for there have been 1,000 peoples. Only the yoke for the 1,000 necks is still lacking. The one goal is lacking. Humanity still has no goal. But tell me, my brothers, if humanity still lacks a goal, is humanity itself not still lacking too?" End of quote. He diagnosed that humans were not a single humanity yet. People are now facing the triple crisis and can survive only when they invent a new governance. Humans are now destined to be born again as one humanity. Humans apply reasons to solve problems, but reason lacks a capacity to share problems. It is a feeling that allows us to sense that a problem occurs. If two persons have different feelings, they will come up with different approaches to solve the same problem, as human reasons work differently. Therefore, the first thing we should do is to reach a consensus of feelings. This can explain why numerous solutions presented up to date based on reasons did not work at all. A German sociologist, Ulrich Beck, has already warned of the risk society in the 1980s. But humans did not make any progress for over 30 years. This shows the limit of human reasons. Then, how can all humans reach a consensus of feelings? There has always been the answer. The answer is the alien invasion. In front of shock and fear, humans will set a common goal and focus on solving the problem. That is, to protect the humanity in the fight against the alien. Currently, humans are forced to have one global perspective for the first time in history to confront the triple crisis. humans began to feel the urgency in front of the triple crisis while COVID-19 is striking a devastating blow to the humanity. The world is now under pressure to sense that now is the time people should stick together to take on actions for their survival. Immediately after the COVID-19 outbreak, a Korean doctor, Kim Myung-hee, offered her insight as follows. I quote, "The Sewol ferry disaster occurred in April 2014 taught us a cruel lesson that no one backs you up. It means that you cannot survive if you follow the order saying stay still and wait for your turn to be rescued in the moment of crisis. People could not trust the government and society and should find ways of survival by themselves." However, Korean citizens faced another disaster of society with the outbreak of MERS in a year. And the social crisis taught us a lesson that it was not impossible for people to seek ways of survival by themselves in the human society. No one could get away from the turmoil of interactions called infection, no matter how individuals carefully practice cautions. End of quote. It seems that this hard-won lesson belongs to Koreans only. In this regard, the world should listen carefully about the following argument of People's Health Institute in Korea. I quote, "We should not add the prerequisites as follows. First, I may be a source of infection, transmitting the disease to others, as many cases of asymptomatic infection with COVID-19 are found. Second, the mindset such as I do not care to be infected or protecting myself is the only priority are not proper. Rather, caring for the safety of others and the society as a whole is more important. Although it may look like stressing altruistic values, it is an effective way to protect myself and help others in the end, considering the characteristics of infectious diseases and pandemics. Although it seems that we are reaching to the end, but it does not end here unless people in the entire society and even the whole world stay healthy. Hence, cooperation and solidarity are not just a desirable notion. They are a must. End of quote. David Hume once argued as follows. I quote, "When this common sense of interest is mutually expressed and is known to both, it produces a suitable resolution and behavior. And this may properly enough be called a convention or agreement between us, though without the interposition of a promise. Since the actions of each of us have a reference to those of the other and are performed upon the supposition that something is to be performed on the other part. Two men who pull the oars of a boat do it by an agreement or convention, though they have never given promises to each other." End of quote. The last sentence in the excerpt above was often quoted by Gilles Deleuze to support his own political philosophy as well. Here, the power to establish a convention is a common feeling or consensus of feelings over the worst possible risk. That is the wreckage of the boat. We cannot just sit back and merely look on the things any longer as if looking on a fire across a river. Rather, we should work together to contain the fire now as it was the house on the next door that was caught on fire. The risk of infection is everywhere, no matter how much individuals are careful about the disease. Everyone should live with the risk of infecting others, no matter how much people take cautions. More than ever, people are realizing the fact that the humanity is sharing the same destiny as they are all in the same boat in the planet Earth. Hence, we should work together to prevent our boat from sinking. If one violates a rule, such behavior would become a threat to all. Therefore, we should prepare ourselves not to allow any violations. We need a preemptive approach instead of settling the aftermath of a crisis. Providing face masks to all members of a community is not an act simply based on a good intention. The reason why we are helping foreigners, immigrants, and refugees is because of that there is a consensus of feelings that it is the only way we all can stay safe in the current situation. It is hard for us to find another solution instead of cooperation, mutual trust, and transparency, which was deemed as abstract notions. As seen from the illustration of Hume, everyone on board the same ship should join hands to invent a new convention. To prevent the ship from sinking, people on Earth should learn how to row the boat and develop a new convention of the new normal. No country can survive with their own in front of infectious disease. Humans cannot reject the new normals any longer. It is not a matter of whether or not to accept the new normals. They have become a must. If we accept that cooperation and solidarity are necessary to overcome this crisis, then what will be the biggest obstacles for cooperation and solidarity? That will be the gap that cannot be condoned. The biggest reason that human feels outrage is the disparity and discrimination. Suppose the situation that people do not have enough money to buy face masks, purchase daily necessities, travel a long distance to odd jobs to earn their living, or wander around the streets in the midst of COVID-19. Those who are excluded from the society as they are poor will be noticed easily like zombies, and they will walk down the streets like a ghost. They are the alter ego of the virus and embark on a journey of revenge on capitalism in the social niches. The humanity should work together to discuss on what to share as common and how, and the practice of sharing should be the essence of planetary governance, instead of extorting. I will call this planetary governance as commonism. One of the most important features of capitalist society is that everything exists in the form of products, and it is impossible to live in the society without money. Here, I'll change my questions. Isn't it possible for people not to notice the gap and discrimination if everyone shares a certain amount of money as the basics? Can we encourage people to engage in cooperative activities and band together by doing so? Then, how much money will the rich gladly pay to feel safe from the risk of infection? And how much money should the poor share with others while not feeling outraged? The humanity stands at the crossroads between life and death. Even though some of them survive, they will never go back to the days when people stay safe and enjoyed living in plenty, as the reason why they were able to stay safe and live in plenty in the past was because of that there was sacrifice of many who do not exist on earth anymore. Therefore, finding a way to live together will be the best option offered to the humanity. Thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone, my name is Huixin Yan. I'm the Deputy Director of the Economic Law Research Center at CIEI in Taiwan. It's my great pleasure to participate in this international video conference on changes in international order and national management strategic in the COVID-19 era, organized by the Center of Taiwan Studies, Asiatic Research Institute, Korea University. I'm invited to make a few comments on Professor Kim Jae-in's paper titled Toward Communism, Exploring Planetary Governance in Front of Triple Crisis, Climate Change, Infectious Disease, Pandemic, and AI. As my area of expertise in trade policy, I read Professor's paper with great pleasures and interest. I'm especially interested in Professor Kim's argument about the concept of consensus of feelings and communism in light of COVID-19 and climate change. Following from Professor Kim's concepts, I take this opportunity to offer some thoughts from a trade policy perspective. Finally, I will also raise a question for Professor Kim. First of all, I fully agree with Professor Kim that the COVID-19 pandemic may be an opportunity other than facing an alien intrusion to create a consensus of feelings. For example, during the last SARS pandemic, because it affected many Asian countries, therefore the development of SARS vaccination didn't take place because it is not a priority or maybe not profitable for pharmaceutical companies dominated by the Western countries. For the current COVID-19 pandemic, however, because the pandemic also brought about serious impacts on most Western countries, especially the United States and European countries, it creates a global consensus of feelings. And this consensus of feelings promoted by the development of the vaccination by almost all major pharmaceutical companies in the EU and the United States. This is a global cooperation pushed by a global crisis, and the crisis creates a consensus of feelings. As my expertise is on trade policy, the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is another major source in creating a consensus of feelings. According to the World Bank Global Economic Outlook published in June this year, there is over 19 of the countries in the world that is now in economic recession, which is worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s, when there was only around 18 of countries enter economic recession. I'm sure that there is also an economic consensus of feelings appearing. Secondly, the pandemic is also promoting countries to seek more cooperation economically. Trusted partners, like-minded countries have become popular keywords in recent days when countries are seeking to rebuild their supply of network with enhanced trusted and security. The next important question is, can we refer to this development as the next generation communism in the economics? I'm not sure about this. It is because in reaction to the economic consensus of feelings, many countries, including the US, Japan, Germany, France, or Australia and etc., started to promote the reshoring of supply chain for critical goods. China is also promoting the concept of international circulation in its 14th five-year economic plan that focus on domestic market. Some argue that this reaction undermines globalization. So finally, my question to Professor Kim is this. In global economics, the consensus of feelings created by COVID-19 appears to be against rather than facilitating the creation of communism. How do you see this? And what suggestions you have to mitigate this trend? Thank you.
Final paper will be presented by Roy Chun Lee, Deputy Director, Taiwan WTO and RTA Center, Chung Hua Institution for Economic Research. And Deputy Director Lee's paper will be discussed by Professor Eunju Park, Korea University.
Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in today's international video conference program of the Center for Taiwan Studies, Asiatic Research Institute at Korea University. The theme of today's conference is changes in international order and national management strategies in the COVID-19 era. And my presentation topic is the implications of economic new normal and challenges post-COVID-19. My presentation will be divided into three parts. The first part, I would like to reflect on the economic impact of the COVID-19 in many parts of the world. Some of the impacts appears to be short-term and will be subsided over time when the pandemic is under control. But there are also structural changes brought about by the pandemic as well as the US-China trade war that appears to be permanent and long-term change. In the second part of my presentation, I'll be sharing with you some of our observations on the changes and the reconfiguration process of the global supply chain. In the last part of the presentation, I will be offering some implications and our understanding on how countries can address this problem. Now, let me start with the first part. That is the short-term economic impact of COVID-19 and the possibility of this impact spreading into the year 2021. This is daily confirmed cases across the globe. It hasn't been updated since August 21st, and we are fully aware that the actual number of confirmed cases are still on the rise for many countries in the world. As the weather cools down, the pandemic seems to enter a second or even third wave of spike, both in terms of daily confirmed cases and the death rate, as the vaccination is still under development. There is a big question mark here as whether we can effectively control and cool down the current pandemic. This indicates that the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will be extended well into the year 2021. But the pandemic is already creating serious problems and troubles for many countries. This is the GDP growth rate for the United States for the second quarter of this year. As you can see the number here, for the second quarter 2020, US GDP growth is minus 32.9, almost reaching 33%. Effectively, this number tells us that the US economy is actually a third smaller than the first 3 months of this year because of the pandemic. Now, this is one of the worst performing quarter in US history. To safely put it, it is the worst performing quarter since Second World War. And some even argues that this is the worst quarter of economic performance since US independence, some 270 years ago. And this is the way we are looking at the seriousness of this economic impact. The situation that is taking place in the US is not a separate and standalone problem. As you can see from these two diagrams prepared by OECD, economic recession, is becoming a common phenomenon across the world in many different parts. Let's start with the diagram on the left-hand side. This diagram captures the number of countries that are in some kind of economic recession in the last 150 years. As you can see, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the worst global recession took place during the 1930 the Great Depression or recession. At that time, 82% of the country in the world are in a kind of economic recession. But according to OECD, the current COVID-19 pandemic is creating a much serious challenge for most countries. As indicated here, by September this year, there were more than 90% of the countries in the world are in an economic recession. Also, if we compare the level of recession in terms of GDP, per capita GDP growth, the current COVID-19 pandemic is the fourth deepest recession in the last 150 years. The deepest recession took place again during the 1930 Great Depression. And also, the second deepest recession took place right in the first 3 years right after the Second World War. And the third one is during the First World War of 1914 to 1917. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic's economic challenge ranked fourth in the last 150 years, but since the pandemic is still unfolding and still not fully under control in many countries, we suspect that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is going to become even more serious in the next few months, and even before the vaccination become widely available. So, are we going to gain a recovery of or economic rebound in 2021? Again, there is a big question mark here. Now, this comparison prepared by the OECD shows the speed of recovery of this COVID-19, of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is extremely slow vis-a-vis two previous global recessions. The gray area in this diagram, for example, GDP, denotes the speed of recovery of the first and the second oil crisis that took place in 1975, 1982. And the blue line reflects the speed of recovery of the 2009 global financial crisis. And the red line reflects the speed of recovery of the current COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, measured in 6 major economic indicators: GDP growth, per capita GDP growth, retail sales volume, trade volume, unemployment rate, and oil consumption, the current COVID-19 pandemic, the speed of recovery of the current COVID-19 pandemic is much slower than the previous two global recessions. Let's take a look at the GDP growth, for example. The year T denotes the year that the global recession took place. A year plus T plus 1 means the second year post the global recession. As you can see, for the first and second oil crisis and the 2009 global recession, global financial crisis, most countries' economy is able to recover significantly in the year T plus 1. And by the time of T plus 4, most countries have not only recovered, but also take up the speed of growth if we are taking 100 points as the baseline. So 100 points is here, and by the year 2, T plus 1, we can see already a very significant rebound. Same thing happened in terms of per capita GDP growth. You can look at T plus 1, and they are all recovering for the last two global recessions, but not with the exception of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So the speed of recovery, even though we are recovering, is slower than expected, or at least slower than the previous two global recessions. Everybody's predicting what will happen next year in terms of economic recovery. But we are facing a major challenge about economic prediction based on historical data. It is because the COVID-19 pandemic is so different from previous global pandemic or financial crisis that historical experiences appears to be not able to provide sufficient evidence for prediction. But in any case, the World Bank come up with a 3-scenario prediction back in July, August this year. The first scenario is that if we are going to have a longer outbreak in 2020, which is not a scenario anymore, it is now the reality, then most countries in the world will not be able to recover from the economic impact until sometime in the year 2022. It applies to advanced economies. It also applies to emerging economies. But in the last or worst case scenario, if there's a longer outbreak in 2020 plus new outbreak in 2021, then the global economy will not be able to touching the bottom until the year 2021, and recovery will not take place until the year 2022. So this scenario is warning us that we should be prepared for an extended period of time when global economy will be in a negative mode. Well, Taiwan is one of the few countries that is able to maintain a relatively positive economic growth vis-a-vis other partners in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, most institutes, including my institute, the CIER, and the TIER, which is another major economic think tank in Taiwan, as well as the Director General for Statistics in Taiwan, all predict that by the end of this year, Taiwan is able to maintain a positive 1.3 to 1.6 GDP growth. Now, this is not a perfect performance vis-a-vis the growth rate before the pandemic, but it is already an outstanding, remarkably positive growth, consider taking into account the serious situation that is taking place in the rest of the world. So, are we able to recover effectively from the pandemic? I think there are three major factors that we need to observe that will affect the outlook of the economic recovery. The first is, of course, the control of the pandemic. If we're going to be able to manage the pandemic effectively towards the end of this year, or maybe in the first half of next year, then the speed of recovery might be more positive. The second factor is the speed of vaccination or the availability of commercially feasible vaccination. And the last factor is the effectiveness of the stimulus package. All countries, including Taiwan and perhaps Korea and other countries, are all introducing stimulus, financial and other stimulus package with the view of maintaining the economy from collapse. But as the pandemic is getting longer and extended all the way to the year 2021, there were concerns whether governments in different countries is able to introduce new stimulus package, given the financial and other constraints, resources constraints they are facing. So the third factor is whether government is able to effectively and continuously introduce stimulus package before the COVID-19 pandemic is finally under control. Now, the second part of my presentation, I would like to introduce some of the economic new normals that we are observing post-COVID-19. And I'll be focusing on the impact of the new normal on global supply chain. At this moment, we're observing at least three global supply chain restructuring process. The first one is the shortening of the supply chain. The second one is the diversification of the supply chain. And the last one is decoupling of the supply chain. I will be briefly elaborate on each of these development in the next 3 slides. Let's start with the shortening of the supply chain. Now, a short supply chain phenomenon already took place before the pandemic. But before the pandemic, multinationals start to reconfigure and shorten their supply chain due to different considerations. For example, many multinationals are responding to their domestic Hong Kong government's incentives to bring back manufacturing capacities, or the so-called reshoring initiatives. And also multinationals are shortening their supply chain because out of geopolitical conflict concerns. And also the development of domestic suppliers are also making companies to reconsider and shorten their supply chain. The COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating the process of the shortening of supply chain. For example, countries such as US, Japan, or even European countries are all introducing new policy incentives to bring back the manufacturing of so-called critical goods. Critical goods include not only personal, preventive, and other medical devices, but also other products or services that are important for countries to effectively address the current or even the next pandemic. So supply chain is coming home, and to reduce the reliance on import because of the COVID-19. So the COVID-19 is making government to rethink the economic structure. So global trade is going to decline, but cross-border investment is on the rise because of the COVID-19, because of the reconfiguration of the supply chain accelerated by the COVID-19. The second phenomenon is the diversification of supply network. Now, in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, because it is very concentrated in China, it make many countries that seize and utilize China as the manufacturing base to reconsider and to and start to see the need to diversify their supply network as a way to increase level of resilience of their supply network. Now, this resilience consideration become more an out of China phenomenon when the pandemic start to become a serious challenge, not only in China, but in the rest of the world. In fact, China is able to manage and control the pandemic by March this year, and by April, they basically resume most of the manufacturing activities. But as the pandemic is taking place outside China, supply network resilience still become a mainstream consideration for many multinational companies. And also, global supply chain reform is pushed by policy incentives. For example, in this segment, where I'm addressing, for example, the economic prosperity network that has been introduced by the US starting this year. It is, many people will see the EPN as a US-China rivalry measures, but not only China and not only US, other countries in Asia Pacific, including Japan, Australia, and India, are all pursuing their own resilience initiative. For example, Japan, Australia, and India just announced back in September of their joint effort of the so-called supply chain resilience initiative. So sometime by November this year, they are going to propose more concrete action plans to deliver this supply chain resilience initiative. And also, EU Commission just published the so-called strategic foresight report back in September. And EU is also arguing that because of the high reliance on imports, EU's economic sovereignty is under threat. So the EU Commission is committed to come up with plans to reduce the reliance on imports, to increase the level of resilience as a way to maintain and to ensure the EU's economic sovereignty. So all these government effort, government initiatives contribute to the acceleration of the global supply chain reform. And also there's a rise of the low-touch economy. Many consumers are changing their behavior in buying and selling and receiving services or buying goods. And medical sectors, for example, is also reforming the way they deliver their medical services, and there are plenty other examples on the paradigm shift of services, especially services provisions. And basically, the new business models that are coming to light are based on the concept of low-touch economy. That is, services provisions is trying to reduce the level of human-to-human contact. And this is obviously outcome of this COVID-19 pandemic. So finally, the implications. I would like to offer a few thinking points to share with you. The first implication of this COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, as well as the supply chain reform, is cooperation is more important than before facing the new normal. New cooperation is needed across different countries on pandemic prevention. Now, a lot of people are predicting that the COVID-19 won't be the last pandemic, global pandemic we're facing. Perhaps it will be the beginning of a much wider, a much more serious pandemic, health issues globally. So cooperation on future pandemic prevention becomes even more important. The second cooperation is to find, locate, identify, and start working with new partners for healthcare and medical security. And the next one will be companies, governments working together to create or to increase the level of resilience for the new supply network. And finally, companies need to find new partners. Companies need to work together in creating or identifying and creating and capturing the benefits of new business models. So as a conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic is still creating a great challenge on everybody, including Taiwan and Korea. But we are also seeing some new opportunities and out of this great challenge we are facing. So I think cooperation is the key word to move forward, to accelerate, speed up the recoveries, and also to prevent the next global disaster to take place. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello everyone. My name is Eunju Park. I'm a research professor at Korea University Public Policy Research Institute. First of all, it's nice to meet you, although we met on the screen. And thank you very much for inviting me to such a great international academic conference. Especially, I would like to thank you so much to Director X Kim and Professor Kwang Yu Nam. The world is suffering from the unexpected spread of coronavirus. This is it is very meaningful to hold an international conference at this time under the theme of change in international order and national management strategy in post-COVID-19 era. The topic I will be discussing today is new normal era challenges and post-COVID-19. After listening to Dr. Lee's presentation, I felt a lot of sympathy, and it was very helpful to think about what we should do in the post-COVID-19 era. So I would like to express my special thanks to Dr. Lee for giving us a good presentation. Then the pandemic of COVID-19 is changing the world in many ways, especially changing or taking place in various fields, including economy, politics, society, and culture, and so on. Some say that COVID-19 cannot be a new standard for changing the international order, but I disagree. I think humanity is unlikely to return to life before COVID-19. So we should assume a more serious change than Dr. Lee said. After COVID-19, there will be there will be permanent and long-term changes in so many areas. I think uh, many experts have talked about the changes in the international community after COVID-19. So I will wrap up here about the tema. And from now on, I will start to discuss in honest. As I have already told you, Dr. Lee's presentation was very interesting. The most interesting story is the global economic recession. Dr. Lee has shown a graph of global per capita GDP growth based on the World Bank and OECD data. I like graph because various information was hidden the graph. In this case, too, since 1870, the world has faced a total of 15 global economic crises, and the recession of COVID-19 era is the fourth largest economic crisis ever. It's very interesting analysis because this result confirmed the fact that COVID-19 is as shocking as the global scale war. In addition, just one, since the 20th centuries, the world has been experiencing more than hundreds of large and small financial crises. There have been about 100 crises in developed country and about 150 crises in emerging country. Go back to the graph. 1914 and from 1917 to 1921 was the period of recession due to First World War, and then from 1945 to 1946. World War II causes a recession. All three of these recessions were due to the exogenous variable of the outbreak of a global scale war. However, the recession since 1991 has different trends. The recession in the COVID-19 era is hardly seen as a sudden accident. Looking at the graph, it has been a downward trend since 1991. It is realistic to analyze that the world economic recession is since the 1991 SNL crisis. In other words, the COVID-19 accelerated the recession and made a bigger decline. The current trend the current trend of low growth is due to a structural weakness of the global economic system. That is endorseness variable. In summary, my argument is this. The exogenous variable called COVID-19 is not a factor in the recession, but only a factor of accelerate to the recession. Currently, the global economy is experiencing a variety of negative factors at the same time. Dismantling the financial alliance and economic conflict between U.S. and China, currency valuation, trade imbalances, rapid demographic changes, decrease in the working age population, worsening financial integrity, and so on. If COVID-19 is an acceleration factor, not a key variable, should we revise the solution? I think we revise the solution about the post-COVID-19 era. It's time to discuss the question of why the world is shaking. Why world is broken down. What does Dr. Rees think about this? Please give me a good opinion. That concludes a short discussion. Thank you for listening.
I think we have finished the presentations and discussions. I think they all made a great contribution to this international video conference co-hosted by Asiatic Research Institute, Korean University, and the Taipei Mission in Seoul. Thank you very much for your attention.